Hi, everybody. Welcome to Teaching Artistry with Courtney J. Body. That's me. This is a podcast that celebrates teaching artists and advocates for community engagement. And like you, I'm home. I have been for now 3 full weeks. Oof. And in light of where we are in terms of staying home and social distancing and really trying to make sure that we're being safe, not only for ourselves, but for others, we have been trying to figure out how to make the podcast have an opportunity for us to meet as close to face as possible. And so we're using Zoom and all the fun social media and other kinds of media platforms for meeting. This is a partnership with Creative Generation as a new video series called #Keep It Making Art. And the series is showcasing creatives who are either making art themselves and sharing that, or finding ways to help others make art and also share so that there can be some joy sparked in the midst of this madness. So I'd like to introduce our first guest, or our first guest, it's our only guest, but it's a great guest, Eric Booth. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Courtney and everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm using my mic because we are also recording this for the podcast, and hopefully everybody can hear you well on the podcast as well. So, I've been really, if you recall, I had asked you to be on the podcast many, many years ago. And now, in this moment, I finally get you on the show.
I know. You found me when I'm not traveling because I can't.
I know. So now that you're staying home, you're stuck. And so I captured you.
Yeah, it is kind of stuck, but it's also kind of opportunity. I think everybody is feeling a little bit of stir crazy. Where's my normal life? And hey, wait a minute, there's some opportunities here I might want to mess around with.
Excellent. So that's actually my first question is, how have you been dealing? How are you and your family dealing with this illness?
Well, I got the virus, but such a mild case of it, only dialed up to about 2. I was able to keep working these 12-hour days from home, doing all kinds of stuff. My partner, girlfriend, is at her own home feeling not so good at all with the virus. And, the rest of my family's fine, but it's a worry, and been dealing with so many teaching artists who not only afraid for their own family's safety, but are seeing their incomes clobbered. So it's an anxious time.
Absolutely. So there's anxiety, there's like the mental aspect, the physical, the health aspect, the fact that we are emotional beings and need connection and can't necessarily, especially for those of us like me who live completely alone. I see that you're also alone, so that we have to be creative in how we actually connect with others, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing okay. I'm glad that it was only up to, dialed up to 2. I also had it. I was never tested, but with all the symptoms much more clarified over time, it was clear that I had it. And I would say mine was probably dialed at a 3. Every day was a new day. So sometimes it was a 3, sometimes it was a 4, but it never got above that. And I never had a fever, which is good. So you mentioned teaching artists. So what do you see happening for teaching artists during this crisis?
Well, I've seen a couple of things. They've been reacting in their usual ebullient way, putting stuff out. I think the big message so far in this interim time, this liminal time, is get stuff out on the internet. And it has been both impressive at how much stuff is coming out and kind of illuminating for the kind of stuff how much we don't know about putting stuff out. It's a pretty narrow range of offer, and there's way more of putting out of art than there is teaching artistry, finding a way to activate the artistry of people through this medium.
Right, and it's been 3 weeks, so I can understand why that has happened. And as teaching artists, whether they're independent contractors or they work for several organizations as a shared labor force, they're sort of dependent on how nimble or flexible the organizations that they might work for are able to be in this moment when everybody's dealing with the stimulus package and trying to figure out how can they protect all of their staff, including their teaching artists, I'm sure. But what kinds of conversations have you had with folks?
Well, I would say the most common ones are either, how can I do this online? Or how can I approximate this? And then the really haunting question, how do I monetize this? And boy, that question is not being answered yet. And that is going to be an issue we're dealing with for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have lots of questions. I'm having some trouble sort of forecasting right in this moment, but
Yeah.
do you have a sense of what that forecast could look like or should look like?
Well, only the littlest sense. It's so frantic at the
Mm.
moment. I think what's happening is we are actually learning what we don't know. We spent a long time not really investing our teaching artist smarts in this medium. We used it in facile ways, but we never began to sink our hands into it the way we do in our art forms. And our longer term challenge is going to be, all right, what is our distinctive contribution that isn't entertainment, that isn't the engagement that video games can provide, that isn't instruction? What do we got? And that's going to be our learning. And we're actually behind the curve, but I sense we're learning fast.
There's a question also around partnership, right? Because if we're working for organizations that generally it's about, interacting with a piece of art, whether it's a visual piece of art or a live theater going experience like my organization, we are pivoting, right? Because that, the way to reach folks is through a digital platform, but what and how do you stay mission aligned? And so that's really interesting, like to think about how we could be working with teaching artists to start to use this as an opportunity to think differently about what the possibilities are, not just in a crisis situation, but in general about what kind of reach we can have and how I like what you're talking about, the actual engagement, not just entertainment, but the engagement piece and what that look or could look like. So often, it's the internal staff who are brainstorming what the programs look like, and the teaching artists are brought in when the money is there, as opposed to at the ground floor planning and being, influencing the planning process, which is sort of what I was talking about before we started recording around, like, how can we embed artists in the policy making, in the decision making processes, as opposed to being just the deliverers of whatever the decisions were made months or years in advance.
I think I think on the other side of this, when we get stable and decide what's next, I think a big part of it is going to be pulling back to the basics of what is it we know and can do as teaching artists, and how does that manifest in this medium? We haven't asked those questions, and partner organizations have not asked those questions. It's going to be a time of doing what the research of Jim Collins says: you pull back to your foundations and experiment boldly from there. We're now experimenting expediently. We're going to become much smarter about that experimentation in the late fall.
In the late fall. Do you think that there's because I'm seeing arts organizations starting to announce canceling their summer programming.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think like maybe there's a way to maximize on that loss of programming to start that brainstorming that maybe, won't be able to be implemented, whatever ideas might be implemented later in time, but
I think that's, I hate to call you naive, but I think their financial crisis is going to be so shaking for those organizations. They are not going to be looking to think afresh about going deeper during the summer. I think they're going to be looking at survival until they get their feet back on the ground in the fall.
I don't like you calling me naive. You're right, but I would say I'm hopeful.
I would be hopeful with you, but I think we're actually looking at a very hard next chapter for arts organizations.
Oh, absolutely. I get that as somebody who works in one, and literally day to day, the story is this, and you need to create scenarios for that, and then you get a hopefully a good piece of news, but then you know that the precipice can happen in the next day. So no, I get it. But I also know that there are artists who, without much to do right now, if there was a way to think about, okay, we all need to be focused on the emergency and the crisis management right now. But is there a way that we could carve out some, like, that idea of a planning grant, right? A bit of money that would be investment in starting to think about, what could happen beyond while we're still in this mode. I don't know if that's
Yes.
possible, but
Big yes. And in fact, let's say from your words to their ears, if
yeah,
they want to carve out that little bit of sliver of money, it will pay off a lot
dividends,
in the
right?
long run.
ROI, right? I did it. I did marketing. Yeah. I love talking to you. I'm glad that we're doing it here. We should talk more. We should definitely talk
Yeah.
more. Okay, so I'm always seeing you in a leadership position, in a leadership role, either doing a keynote or convening folks or lifting some new great project off the ground. But I never really, I never get to see you as an artist. And I know that you love words, also specifically the etymology of words. And so, how do you define yourself or identify as an artist?
Well, I grew up as a theater artist, and I think I've just become a writer with 7 books and sort of 1,000 essays in the nonfiction category, and a completely secret life as a poet.
Yeah,
I
well,
never
that's what I'm
shared.
interested in, a poet. So, what art are you making in this?
Well, I have used the opportunity of these mornings to go into a file on my computer that is almost finished poems and to move some of them into the finished poems category.
Yeah.
So I've had several that have migrated in the last week.
Would you share some?
I would. And what's particularly vulnerable for me in this moment is this is the first time in my entire life I am sharing a poem of mine publicly. So if
Honored.
if we got the minutes, I got 3 for you.
We've
They're
got the
all
minutes.
short. The first one comes from a moment when somebody did something stupid and I couldn't think of anything smart to say. And so I just stood there like an idiot without a good retort. So this one is called Delayed Retort. Pam's wheel is still spinning, but the hamster has died. And Andy is, alas, all booster, no payload. Those are the lines I wish I could deliver in the moments that richly deserve them. I like you, Angela, but I don't want to see you handling subatomic particles. William, did you forget to pay your brain bill again today? Instead, these pop up only in reflective churn. Do I think to say, Jack, as I stand close to you, I swear I can hear the ocean roar. In the moment, I stand diplomatic, rejoinderless, thinking what a jerk, or this is wrong, dully impotent. And I don't even recognize the chance to ask Bob if he rode the tilt-a-whirl just a little too long today, or tell Suzanne the glaring truth that Antonio has a bad brain to testosterone ratio. I'm so lame in live retort that even for me, it's hard to believe I beat out a million other sperm. There's one.
That's amazing.
That's kind of snarky. People don't know I got that going on.
Oh, yeah.
And here's a sweet one that is, for if any of the listeners know about my book, Tending the Perennials, this comes from that world. It's called The Source. Trace every work of art all the way back to its source, and behold, every single one originates from the very same place. We make such things to return. If all goes well in encountering your work of art or mine, we may trace our way back to that source and meet up there. Come, right now. It's not so very hard and not so far to the place where poems are born.
Love it.
And one last one, for teaching artists. Poignantly, it's about a teaching artist in a classroom, and we don't get to be with the kids right now.
Oh.
I know, it's poignant. Here we go. There is nothing new under the sun, they say, and to the sun, that is certainly true. But I'm not so sure when I look at the way Jasmine raised her arm in that dance we did in the 4th grade today. I thought I saw something no son or daughter has ever done before. And in each poem, both Victor's and this of mine, we reach for a phrase to grasp and release something that is true and sparkling new, new and worth the notice of that ancient, pitiless solar gaze that has seen it all except this. There we go.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you so much, poet Eric Booth.
Nice, fun to do, scary.
Yeah, you did great.
I have new courage for those poets who get up at the mic. God love them.
I agree. I think for me that's singing. Singing is like really singing, not just karaoke, right? That's what terrifies me. I really appreciate you sharing your heart through your art, and being, allowing yourself to be that vulnerable with us. Thank you.
Sure.
Is there any last thoughts that you have as we start to wrap up?
Yeah, a couple of things about making stuff. One is to just note this remarkable event, the UN Global Call to Creatives. It's an unprecedented event that I want to make sure all of your listeners know about, where the UN has turned to the artists of the world to say, would you make art that is about the 6 health habits we need all people to be attending to right now so they stay safe? They've turned to us for the first time. And I think they learned to do this when they saw what Theater for Social Change did across Africa to stem the growth of the AIDS, HIV epidemic. That Theater for Social Change changed those safe sex habits. And they're turning to us again to say, can you help us with our safe behaviors to get us through this tough time? So if you can just Google UN Global Call to Creatives, see if you can make something to contribute to this global endeavor.
That's wonderful. Eric Booth, thank you so much for being a part of this show. Keep making art with Teaching Artistry, Courtney J. Body. And thank you all for listening and for watching. And you know what? Keep making art.
Keep making art.